This is Gene DeLisio with a featured sports interview from WDLB and WOSQ. In the years just after World War II, Marshfield High School had some outstanding athletes, among them Ed Fandry. Ed played for the 1949 and 1950 Marshfield Tiger football teams, rushing for 268 yards and 3 touchdowns in 3 seasons. He had a big game in his final high school football game, rushing for 158 yards and a touchdown, and catching a 74-yard touchdown pass against Ashland to close out the 1950 season. Ed also played 3 years of high school basketball at Marshfield, scoring 333 points, leading Marshfield in scoring in the 1950-51 season, and becoming the first player in Tiger history to score 30 points in a ball game, a feat he accomplished against Wapaka during his senior season. Ed was recognized by Marshfield High School for his accomplishments when he was inducted into the Marshfield Tiger Athletic Hall of Fame in 2012.
I've got so many people that are involved in it now that are in the Hall of Fame. Jerry Witt played 2 years of football and 2 years of basketball with Jerry, and he's in the Hall of Fame. Wayne Weiler, who was our quarterback, I played 2 years there and 1 year at Stout. He was our quarterback at Stout. He played ball with the Southward boy when he was just a little Schaefer out under the driveway where we played ball. And now, of course, Jerry Witt, Jerry Bozen, a classmate of mine, and also a very dear friend.
Well, some really outstanding athletes and people there in that group, so congratulations on that. Let's talk about your early memories of growing up in Marshfield and some of the, maybe the guys just before you, some of the guys you admired and saw play as a young boy growing up in Marshfield.
Yes, we used to play basketball. Doc McGinn had a basket up on the corner of Cedar and 3rd Street. And some of the older boys were John Kleinheinz, who was quite a high school athlete. And I looked up to him, and later, my sophomore year, and he was a senior, I was his understudy at an end position. We had quite a few good athletes in those days, and we got second place. We had in the Wisconsin Valley in football my sophomore year. And I still have a little silver football that says second place, Wisconsin Valley Conference.
Well, you had some good success as a football player at Marshfield High School. Of course, most people know you for your basketball ability, but we do want to touch upon football as well. Tell us about some of the highlights of your football career with the Tigers.
Well, one of the highlights was when Rapids had a stellar football team, probably in 1948 or 49. We went down to Rapids and played, and I was the only sophomore on the team, and we beat Wisconsin Rapids. They had some fine Dean Showers and Reamer and Torzani, and they had a fine bunch of athletes, and we beat them that night. That was kind of a highlight of my sophomore year. Junior year, we had Witt and Weiler. Of course, we had a good team and had a pretty good record. But then the bottom fell out. We had 5 lettermen returning when I was a senior, and we didn't have much of a record, really. And I was converted from end to running back the last 2 games, and did fairly well, but I didn't know I was a backfield man until that time.
You know, you mentioned playing with Witt and Weiler, and those are kind of legendary names in Marshfield because of the great success they had, especially in football. Tell us about those guys. What made them special players on the field? Some of the skills that they had that made them real special football players.
Well, Weiler, who was our quarterback, had just a phenomenal football brain on him. He was good at calling plays. He heck of an arm. He could throw well. And, of course, Witt's speed. You know, he won 100 and 200 that year in track down the state, and he really had some speed. Should talk about the track team we had when I was a junior. We had a 4-man track team. And our coach was Dick Naslin at the time. He was my biology teacher, and he talked me into going out for track. So we had Witt, a kid named Russ Hillman, and Leon Zolke was our pole vaulter, and then we had Jerry Witt. And it was a 4-man team. We'd pile in his new Studebaker with his wife and put the bamboo pole, which that was his pole for pole vaulting, Leon's, and we'd go to a track meet. we didn't have shoes. We ran in tennis shoes. I ran the half mile, and I also high jumped. And of course, Whit would always win the races, and it was quite a fiasco. And we didn't even have a track to run on. I ran out in that fairgrounds track, so I knew what a half mile was, or run the hallways, and it was something else out there.
Ed, you played football for the Tigers really only a few years after Beale Stadium had opened. It built, I think, in the early 40s. You were there about 8 or 9 years later. What was that like to play in Beale Stadium? It was a relatively new facility.
Well, I don't think it's changed much, other than the bricks were falling apart, and being in my position as buildings and grounds, we had plaster put on, a cement plaster, and that started to crumble, and then afterwards they put the siding on that you see nowadays. But the turf was always real good turf. I don't know, whoever did it in our high school days took pride in keeping that field in good shape. It's got a beautiful crown. It really drained well, and it was enjoyable to play on. And like I said, I don't know, here at the banquet, I had a letter from Walt Kroll, and Walt was congratulating on his win from a big team from Minnesota, and he said, P.S. whoever your groundskeeper is, tell him to stay with the job because it's the finest field we ever played on.
Well, I know, Ed, you still get to see some football these days. It must be quite a different game today from what you played back in the early 1950s. How about some of the changes that have taken place in the way the game is played from then to now?
Well, I think the equipment, we didn't have face masks, and we had the ugliest looking helmets I've ever seen. They bought some helmets that was to protect the other player. They were plastic, but they had a ½ inch of sponge rubber on the outside, and they looked like a chrome, like the dome on the junior high, the big old dome. As far as pads and everything, we had pretty good equipment. And the game, it's more sophisticated now. It was pretty simple in those days. We had probably 8 or 9 plays and 2-3 pass plays, and I don't know, it was no different. I don't think it was just a little not as fast a game. But
I want to talk about your basketball career also, because that's what most people usually think about when they think about Ed Fandry. How about some highlights of your basketball career?
I really enjoyed basketball. Some of the highlights, well, we played Eau Claire Memorial at Eau Claire my junior year, and Chuck Menzel, who later played for the Lakers, scored 33 points that night. So when we were seniors, they came to Marshfield, and the coach says, Fandry, you've got Menzel. And I clamped on Menzel. I made him really work that night, and I think I outscored him 13-10. And that was kind of a highlight. But I played against some pretty good competition. I played against Dick Cable, who later played for the University of Wisconsin. I was all conference with Dick. Chuck Gertler and Bula Gill from Wisconsin Rapids. We had pretty good teams in those days. And we ran up 78 points, I think, was our high in the year. So, and we didn't have a 3-point play, or we didn't have bonus free throws. So it's quite an achievement to run that many points up in a game.
You know, that was something that was brought up tonight during the banquet, and really it's kind of a misnomer that back in the early days of basketball, the scores were 15-12 and 18-15, but not really in your era. After World War II, there became a real offensive boom, and you were part of that. Do you recall anything that made offense more prevalent in your era as opposed maybe to just 10 or 15 years before, when those basketball games were so low scoring?
Well, at one time they jump ball every time the ball exchanged hands, and you go to center court and jump ball. That no longer was true, and we started running gun in our era, and I think maybe it was from our playing outside under a basket. We'd gun all the time, and I don't know. We played Rapids one time here, and they put a press on us, and everybody was afraid to handle the ball. Instead of passing, I'd pass to somebody, pass back to me, and I thought, well, this is really ridiculous, and I just drove it down the floor every time, and that's one of the highlights too, when we give Rapids a good ball club game that night.
I do want to ask Ed about that night. You became the first Marshfield Tiger player to score 30 points in a ball game. Tell us about that night for you.
I think everything I fired up went in. We were playing at Wapaka, and it was in their old armory there. And I remember they had a pair of brothers, Johanknick boys. They were pretty big guys. But I don't know. I guess I scored most of them under the bucket, and they beat us that night, 65-50, and I had 30 of the 50 points. But it seemed like everything just went in that night. And as Bozen said, I took 266 shots. Wasn't quite true.
How about playing at Purdy Gym? What was that like for you?
Well, that was my home court. I really liked it. And later I refereed there, and I had a shot there. I practiced it a lot when I was a kid, and they had a pipe running down the center of the gym, a big heating pipe, and I could stand under one of the side baskets and shoot over that pipe and hit the other side basket. I had that thing wired, that shot. But you had to watch. We had the 3 second or the 3 foot line. You could step in that to take the ball out because you were stepping on people's feet. So when you were driving down the sideline, you had to watch out that you didn't dribble the ball off someone else's foot. And we had a balcony there that hung over about 3 foot over the playing court, so you couldn't shoot from that spot at all. You had to move in a little bit. And we'd pack the place, and they would pound their feet on the upper level, and the people down below would get plaster in their hair. But it was home to us. I had a lot of fun playing in that court.
Let's talk for a few moments about your coaches. Primarily, you played for Lynn Jordan and Carlton Rolls, both in football and basketball. Tell us about what those men meant to you.
Lynn Jordan was a fine football coach, and he had an assistant named George Summers, and also our old track coach, what did I say his name? I can't think of. But anyway, he was a fine footballer, but he didn't know much about basketball, and he knew it himself. So to help him out, we got a guy named Jay Wallenstrom, and he worked for Weyerhaeuser Corporation in Rodis at the time, and he had played for the Phillips 66 Oilers. And on Sundays, we go to the gym, and he taught us how to position. He helped Lynn out a lot in basketball. But Carlton Rolls was a fine football coach, and he knew basketball. We played Oklahoma style, round and round in continuity, and we did as well as we could. We had 3rd place in the Valley that year, and Point got 1st, or Rapids, or vice versa. I don't know. But old Carlton was a fine man, and he took me up to Minneapolis for the NCAA playoff in 1951 at Williams Arena. And I had a little kid that never got out of town at all, hardly, except for basketball. And we had a fine trip, and I saw the playoff. And his mother lived in a big mansion there, and I had a room with a TV set, and I thought I was really it.
How about some of the guys you played basketball with during your Tiger career?
Well, we had a good bunch of guys. I had Joe Schrader, who now lives in Detroit, and Jerry Bozen, of course, and Tom Buckman. We had Tom Fellifer. Who else did we have? I'm going to leave some Dick Fleming. I'm going to leave some of the guys out, but we had a good bunch, and we were raised together. We used to hang out. You couldn't get a gym in Marshfield to play when we were kids. I was going to bring that up tonight. We could play at the Presbyterian Church on Tuesday night for about an hour. They'd leave us in there for open gym. And, of course, I went to a parochial school, and we didn't get to use those gyms very much either. But we could go to Presbyterian on Tuesday night. And Saturday morning they had a program. Mr. Rademacher, who was the 8th grade coach and teacher, would have a program from 9 o'clock till noon every Saturday. Of course, he played his favorites that were going to play for him, so some of the kids never got to play. And that was about our extent of using the gym when we were kids. But we played a lot of touch football on the old McKinley ground where the old Washington School is, and across the street was Hefco Flower, and we'd take our breaks over there, and they had a water bubbler, and then we'd go back and play again. We had a good gang of kids. Chuck Ninus, you might have heard about Chuck. He lived right on the corner across the street from there, and we had basketball courts in Buckman's basement and Chuck's basement. They were made a little. We used a tennis ball for the basketball, and we had a little backboard on it, and they had little nets, and we'd play in there, and that's where Chuck learned how to broadcast. He'd say, Timken silent automatic. That was the furnace. He said, "There's a pass to Timken silent man there over there," and then they'd make that crowd sound like the crowd. And I think that's where Chuck got his broadcasting experience.
That's good to know. You did spend some time as playing some baseball in Marshfield. What was baseball like in Marshfield back in your era?
I played baseball 1 year. I was a kid that liked my uncle's farm. And in the summer, I worked on the farm, so I didn't get to play Legion ball or anything. So baseball was kind of a minor sport. I played 1 year, and we were having kind of financial trouble. My mother was raising three of us, and so I had to get a job. So in the spring of the year, I ran track, and I gave up baseball then. But I'll tell you where we played. We played on the where the track is now, and if you take the southwest corner, that was home plate. And then there had three telephone posts for lights on Beale Stadium. And the first one, if you hit it over between the first and second pole, it was a ground rule double because it was such a short field. But if you could, no fence, if you hit one out in center field, that could roll all the way to the building. You could make it run. So there wasn't any really baseball facilities in Marshfield. And we didn't have any track until, like I said, we got here later. When I got out of service, we had a track, but it was a cinder track. And all we got was clinkers from the powerhouse and ground that up and made that cinder track and dirty. We didn't have any porta pits. We would go to Modern and Marshfield and pick up their scrap sponge rubber and put it in a net, and that was our porta pit. And if you left out in the rain, God himself couldn't lift it. It was soaked up with rain. But we came a long way with the facilities since the first day I started for schools was August 1st, 1957. And my first job, I reported to work at Madison School, and I worked with Jerry Holubitz and another fellow, and we were building a ball diamond. So a lot of my career was working with the sports facilities.
And during that career, you certainly saw quite a change in the facilities with the construction of the field house and some other things going on around town. Tell us about some of the projects you were involved with your building and grounds work that really improved the facilities here in Marshfield.
Well, I think Mr. Bozen and I, Jerry, told about the swimming pool. We got a tea kettle for a swimming pool the first time they had it, and it was about the cheapest thing they could buy. It was made by Chester Pool out of Hamilton, Ohio, and you see the gray hair or lack of hair I have. It was because of the swimming pool. The first 2 years, we had nothing but trouble with it. And I lived in the darn thing trying to get the thing, and then it started a pit, and we had leaks, and we finally got rid of that and got a ceramic pool, and that's one of the changes. Of course, we didn't have the gymnastic gyms. We just had the field house at that time, and like Kathy Abley said, they were tearing up and putting down every time the basketball team or a different sport. It was terrible. Now they get the gym. They got the new gymnastics gym right after I left, and the weight room. That was quite an addition to the. Beale Stadium was always Beale Stadium. We always took pride in that, and we tried to. When I first started, we didn't have a sprinkler system. We had to water that with garden hoses, and you can imagine how much time that took and lack of water. And we didn't have any weed control at that time, and finally someone from the experiment farm come up with a roller that we could apply weed control. And little by little, we got it to a pretty good field. And ball diamonds, we didn't have any ball diamonds to speak of. And then they had Reeds Field, but then when they built the nuclear part of the hospital, they dug down, I don't know how many stories they had to dig, so we got that filled for nothing, and we put it out on that football field, or that south end or east end of that, and we made a ball diamond out there after we got it situated. I can remember trying to get a decent football field, and we were a little short out there when there was a creek running through it, and they leveled the ground, but not enough to put a football field, so we needed a little more land. And I had to go to the DNR, because that's a navigable stream. So here comes Max Zanowski and a man from the DNR with hip boots. And I can remember Arnie Blumke and I were out there at 5 o'clock in the afternoon they got in the creek, and I could hear swish, swash, swish, swish, the water going all the way down. He got way down there, and he says, Fandry, how many feet you need? I said, we need 1,000. He says, you got 999, you'll never get another inch.
Well, there's some great stories there. You had a great career with the Buildings and Grounds Committee, also a great career as an official in a lot of sports, not football, but basketball and softball and baseball primarily. Any stories you have or reminiscences you have about your officiating career as well?
Well, I think I saw you enough times at Columbus when you first got here, and I was working the games up there. And I really enjoyed basketball. I wore out about 100 officials, I think. And I always worked John Harrington's games, and tournament games and all those at the university. When they first started out, this was good too. They played at Columbus, and they played double headers. They had 4 teams, and they played double headers there. And we got $20 a game, and it was always on a Saturday afternoon when they rented, the university rented Columbus Gym. And 2 cheerleaders, 7 players on each team, coach, no fans. That was how the university started out. And I worked everything. I think grade school tournament, Walt Crow would always call me for the holiday tournament, and I'd say, Walt, I can't work next year. Walt said, you got to work it. Yeah, you got to work it. And so I always worked this holiday tournament. I worked junior high, parochial schools, city league, all over the valley. I'd get to places like Fountain City, Cochrane. I'd get Prentice, Ashland, some tournament games at Eau Claire. It was a good profession. I really enjoyed basketball. And, of course, then with Pete Kapleen with his softball team, I worked all kinds of city league slow pitch, and I used to work fast pitch when it was really going hot in Marshfield. And I'd kind of give that for slow pitch when Stan Martin was here, and he needed to umpire. And so I was a head umpire and arranged for umpires and made out schedules. And then Pete got into fast pitch, and I started fast pitch, and I worked with guys like Bob Shane from Wisconsin Rapids or Zittleman in Marshfield, but we worked most of Pete's games. And I enjoyed that too. And finally it got to a point, I think when I was 60 years old, I finally gave it up. Mrs. Aldi said, you were the best referee running backwards. She always said you could run faster backwards than most officials could run frontwards.
Okay, well, it's been a great career. Anything else you want to talk about your long career in Marshfield?
No, but I enjoy Marshfield. I'm proud of the city. I'm proud of the Hall of Fame now, and I think it's just a fabulous place to live. And I'm glad you're our sports director. And I had to say, your sidekick, Mr. Tauscher today, Denny, came all the way from Madison to be here for my thing tonight. And he and I ride all the Packer games together, so we have a good time. And I wouldn't give up Marshfield for all the money in the world. I think it's the finest place, and you're doing one heck of a fine job.
Marshfield Tiger sports standout Ed Fandry, inducted into the Marshfield Tiger Athletic Hall of Fame in 2012. This is Gene DeLisio reporting for WDLB and WOSQ Sports.